when you have lower oxygen, your reaction time increases, meaning that when you respond to a threat, you trigger pull, you lose about 30% of your reaction time, or it increases 30%.
You know Jake Paul, controversial, viral, unstoppable.
You're not even a fighter. Like, you do exhibitions and lost like 4 years ago.
But what if the guy helping engineer his rise isn't a boxing coach or a PR rep? It's this man, Geoffrey Woo, founder of Ketone-IQ, Stanford-trained computer scientist, and the brains behind the biohacking elite. He doesn't coach influencers. He programs performance.
Don't lose that childlike curiosity and spirit. A core operating hypothesis I have is that there's two scarce assets in the world of business. One is capital, but I think what's arguably more scarce is actually attention.
He fuels cyborgs, the ones launching billion-dollar companies, breaking records, and outthinking everyone in the room. Because today's flex isn't followers, it's focus. It's glucose that never crashes. It's willpower on command. You've heard of ketosis, but this is performance engineering. This is nutrition as code. This is what happens when you stop eating like a caveman and start fueling like a machine. Because your limits aren't physical, they're metabolic. You need ketones at altitude to stop that inflammatory cascade. And they also seem to inhibit Alzheimer's disease. And they're just a straight up nootropic. If your ketone levels are high enough, or you have good metabolic flexibility and all the right minerals, all the stuff that makes hardware work, you're unflappable.
I know that ketones post-workout increases muscle protein synthesis.
What do you know about ketones and testosterone? Everyone has a plan until life punches you in the mouth. But comebacks aren't random. They're coded. And yours starts with a shot. You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey. Today's guest is Geoff Woo. Geoff and I have known each other for a long time because he's a fellow Silicon Valley nerd and also the founder of Ketone-IQ. You might have heard me talking about the different types or methods of extending ketones in humans. And you can do intermittent fasting. You can do longer term fasting. You can do a ketogenic diet without too many carbs or too much protein. You could take MCT oil, which I would say is the original exogenous ketone. Too much will make you poop. Oops. Right. And then in my books, I've talked about things like ketone esters and ketone salts, which I typically don't recommend. And Geoff's company makes something called a ketone diol, which I think hits the sweet spot. So I want to talk with him about ketosis and ketones and performance enhancement. But more importantly, he's a computer science guy and a systems thinker. And he's also a very successful entrepreneur, computer science from Stanford. So we're going to talk about how to think about human performance, how to think about biohacking. And I think your latest claim to fame is you're working with Jake Paul on a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Is this like a venture fund, or what's the thing with Jake?
We started a venture capital fund back in 2021 called Anti-Fund. And, well, one, thanks for having me. And two, it just it's cool to go from just friends and acquaintances to doing some content together. Cause I think in terms of just all the attention on longevity, biohacking, all of this stuff, I feel it comes full circle that I think you deserve a lot of credit to being really the father of biohacking, kind of anchoring a lot of these ideas. So cool to trade notes and share ideas here.
It's not a trademarked term for a reason. I want it to be a movement, and you're definitely a part of it. Yeah. There are a few companies who've been really innovating in the ketone space, and yours is, I would say, the most successful one right now.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not with Bulletproof anymore. And we had, MCT oil, which is still good, but it doesn't do what your stuff does. So you've really focused and stayed the course. And I think it's making a difference. So I'll tell you, I don't get on an airplane without using Ketone-IQ because I know the science, right? Yeah. Do you ever fly without it?
No, I mean, I think that's actually some of the most, less understood use cases, right? Just the anti-radiation of impact of being in ketosis. And I think the cognitive benefits, right? I think the Tour de France, Lance Armstrongs, the MMA fighters are big customers, including the military. But I think just for brain, that's my favorite use case personally.
There you go. I have told every professional athlete I've ever consulted with, if you are in a sport where you might get hit in the head, you need to be on Ketone-IQ before you get hit in the head so you don't have long-term brain damage. And I don't know if you can make those claims because you're involved with the company. I'm not. So the science is very clear. Ketones stop that inflammatory cascade. And they also seem to inhibit Alzheimer's disease, and they're just a straight up nootropic.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, just touching on the use cases. I mean, I think the genesis of like the latest versions of Ketone-IQ came from a $6 million SOCOM contract. So when you're in, high-end special operations, one, it's the performance enhancement and the reaction time. But the second part, these guys are taking traumatic brain injury left and right? You're a breacher, or you're just taking concussive hits from grenades and whatnot. So that's some of the recovery use cases that isn't just validated in the field, but we're actually just putting more and more effort to partner with university research contracts.
I was about a year ago here in Austin at a dinner, and I met a couple of the Black Rifle Coffee guys.
Yes.
It was a big table. I don't know if you heard the conversation that we were talking about, if it flowed over to you, but Jared saying, Dave, we got brain injured in the special forces from concussive blast.
Yep.
So then we're in the CIA in Central America, and the only thing that keeps our brains working is, MCT oil and butter and coffee, my old brand Bulletproof that I have nothing to do with anymore. And he's like, that was the only thing that worked for our concussed brains. And that was what inspired us to come back and start a coffee focused brand. Cause coffee is amazing for your brain. And I'm like, that is the coolest story ever. But you look at the amount of ketones you can get from an MCT oil kind of thing versus what you can get from Ketone-IQ. I combine that with a guy named Dr. Veach, who you know who he is.
Yes.
And longtime listeners heard the last interview Dr. Veach ever gave. And he spent 40 years.
That was with you, right?
It was with
Yeah.
And he passed unexpectedly.
Yeah.
He was, I think, in his 80s at the time.
Yeah.
And he talked about, well, I've studied ketones and mitochondria for 40 years. I studied with Hans Krebs from Krebs Cycle. And he's the guy who told me you need to have your ketones high when you fly. And we went into such great detail on it. And he's saying the ketone esters, there's a problem, right? And ketone salts, there's a problem. MCTs, there's not a problem, except you poop yourself and you can't get your levels that high.
Yeah.
And then you guys came out with these ketone diol that seems like it's the sweet spot.
Yep.
What is a ketone diol?
Yeah. So I think just to frame up, and I think that Veach interview, I think the super ketosis nerd should really listen to that. Because I think Veach, through his Krebs to George Cahill, you remember the super long fasting studies at Harvard. Yeah. That was his mentor, his direct mentor at Harvard Medical School. So I think that lineage of just understanding that the science and the clinical data behind fasting and exogenous ketones, I think really comes really nicely through that Veach heritage of Krebs, Cahill, Veach. And I think you deserve a lot of credit to popularizing MCT oils, right? I feel like it's almost mainstay now with butter coffee and coconut oil coffee. Oh. And that was you. So I feel like people don't recognize just the lineage. I feel like there's so many of these fatty coffee things that
they're all knockoffs.
Yeah. I mean, essentially they are. And this is from a fellow student of the history of this industry. I just seen all these upstart, nice, great businesses doing all their variations of coffee.
It's the same with collagen. I made MCT and collagen $1 billion businesses, and you'll laugh because you're a business guy. Yeah. One of my investors at Bulletproof walked in one day and said, "Hey, Dave, we're putting $30 million behind your closest competitor in the collagen space, and we're taking our board observer and we're putting them in their board of directors." And then 4 months later, that company had a suspiciously similar product portfolio to mine. I'm like, "Really? You're gonna back my company and then back my nearest competitor and
steal my ideas?"
Yeah. And they're like, "Oh, don't worry. There's a firewall between them." I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like anytime there's innovation in the industry, there's going to be multiple people entering. There's always going to be a high quality one and there's going to be a bunch of cheap knockoffs. Yep. Just go to Amazon. Yep. There's cheap knockoffs of everything.
Yep.
Right. So sometimes they work and sometimes they're even better.
Yep.
You don't know, but you guys, at Ketone-IQ, you've really been at the pioneering cutting edge. I remember I got your products. This is back, 8-9 years ago. It was $99 for 3 doses.
Correct.
And it tasted like gasoline mixed with Jell-O. It was horrible stuff.
Yes.
And my kids will drink the modern equivalent, the modern Ketone-IQ. Yep. They don't love it, but it's not unpleasant.
Yep.
And I'm like, "Wait, we're getting on a flight to Turkey or something. You need to drink this." And then they do.
Yeah. So maybe just to frame up just all the categories, right?
Sure.
As you mentioned, medium chain triglycerides, MCT, right? These are 6, 8, 10 carbon length fatty acid chains. Mm-hmm. And they're popular for inducing ketosis because they readily convert into ketone bodies. So that's a great benefit. But to your point, if you eat too much fat all at once, you poop yourself and you just like can't consume that much. It's hard to elevate to a very, very high level. And then there's another class of exogenous ketones, ketone salts. And the downside of ketone salts is you bind beta hydroxybutyrate, the main ketone body, with minerals, sodium, calcium, magnesium. And again, if you like, these are like 2,000% of your RDA amount of sodium, right? We can talk about the benefit of electrolytes, but oftentimes you don't want to be drinking that much salt all at once.
It's a little hard on the kidneys to have that much mineral. And I'm the number one 8 grams of sodium a day or you're dumb guy for almost everybody. So I don't mind sodium, but you cannot process that much metal if you're going to be on ketone salts for a long time. I don't think it's advisable.
Exactly. So that was, I would say, like probably the early 90s, 2000s era of like the ketone technology. And I remember reading, my introduction into ketones was through fasting, actually. I remember, I think again, just recognizing your heroes or inspiration, right? I remember like you were talking a lot about fasting. This was probably circa early 2010s.
Yeah, that was
intermittent fasting.
Yeah, the first big book was the Bulletproof Diet. I can't find an intermittent fasting book before that was ever mainstream.
Yeah. So like I was one of those, probably in my mid 20s at the time, just, all right, let's do 72-hour fast. It's like, figure this stuff out. And then, I started experimenting with fasting, restricting carbohydrates. And, I ended up working to a 7-day water fast, but it's not easy, right? Like it's achievable, a lot of mental discipline. Your hunger attenuates after 3 days. So you don't feel any worse. So you actually kind of feel like you're just buzzing on ketones. It actually feels kind of nice. But the whole process of getting to ketosis is like quite challenging for the average person, right? Like I think
unless you cheat. Just take some ketones.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
And that was the engineering part of me where it's like, hey, this is like an interesting metabolic state that more of us should tap into. But can we expect 300 million Americans who are all overweight and diabetic to start fasting and eating keto? No. Right. So that was where like the engineering hacking side was like, okay, is there just exogenous technology that can induce ketosis really, really quickly? And like the first effort was actually ketone esters. So we partnered with kind of like that Veach line to launch the first commercially available ketone ester. But the problem with the ketone ester was that one, it's super expensive. Like it's just like and then two, the taste is like horrible.
Do you know that back then I was the opposing bidder with Veach to get the same tech that you guys founded the company on?
Yeah. I think we closed the circle around there.
Yeah, that's right. We might have talked about that before. But it's too funny. But I was like, I don't know if I could sell this. Like, it tastes like crap and it's expensive. And you went out and you got a meaningful amount of funding from Mark Andreessen and people. And you're like, all right, we're going to just keep iterating and solve the problems. Which was brilliant because you have a great product now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I remember like giving you a call in like 2015, 2016, because we're like very, very early exploring the same technology tree essentially. Right. So I think we were just like exploring this idea maze together in parallel paths. But yes, I do remember that you were like, hey, it's expensive and some of the drawbacks. And I think, some of the people read that you had at the time, I think also played out to be quite true in terms of just like, not just the technology risk and like the technology challenges, but also just the types of people and the way you want to do business, which I think informs the way I want to like do business today.
Tell me more about that. Like how do you select the right people to do business with? Because you've got a lot of investments in businesses.
Yeah. I think it boils down to long-term games with long-term people. I think in this TikTok, Instagram Reel era, it's like everyone thinks that you can be like driving Lamborghinis after like selling some e-commerce courses in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think because TikTok and Instagram Reels is the way young people engage with the content, and that's how they learn. Like, honestly, it's just like they go to learn their news on TikTok, not Google or any of the like textbooks. I just think about just selecting for people that have durability, have resilience, and just have like a long-term vision of what they actually want to build towards. Because as you know, you've been in this game for decades. Like, you're a pillar because you didn't just flame out and die, like ups and down challenges, but you're there. And I think that's just like, that is the difference between someone like yourself and like the 1,000 people that come and go, right? Like how many, over the last decade, I feel like there's been so many entrepreneurs and brands that have come and gone.
There's a lot of I'm going to say copycats, not copycatting my stuff. There's people who copy your stuff and my stuff. I'm just saying they'll find something to copy, and they'll go out there and say, oh, like I found this and I can do the same thing. And I've seen people literally hire a copywriter and say, rewrite every blog post on that site. And now with AI, they're just saying, I wrote a script to steal everything on the internet. And you're like, what value did you add?
Yeah.
Right. And I look for that in people.
Yeah. And I think it's also the game that you played, like selling coffee, like the first e-commerce seller, right? Like that was like the genius move at the time. But now that's like a commodity. Like you got to play the next playbook. So just copying your blog post from 10 years ago is not going to do it anyways. Mm-hmm. So like you can go copy our copy or our blog post or our content. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Like go copy what I did 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Like can you actually skate to where the puck is actually moving? And I think, I think that's like something that like even when we just like catch up, it just feels like there's so much battle scars and knowledge of like this industry and this whole space that people just like we've forgotten more about this space than most people have learned. And not to like overly compliment ourselves, but I think there is something about just persistence and durability and longevity of knowledge and focus in an area.
There is, and there's a pattern matching. You know, we've both been investors for a while. Yeah. I've worked for VCs and have probably more angel investments than I should have. But after a while, you start getting pattern matching. Yeah. And one of the older VCs, I think it was Kleiner Perkins, said it takes about $10 million to make a good investor because they're going to lose $10 million. And this was pre-Biden dollars, so that's like $50 million now. Right. Yeah. But because you're just going to make mistakes. Oh, I didn't see that. And so I would say the shift in me has been the larger my business grew, the more I realized I needed to find someone who'd already done that because it's one thing if, you know, you're riding a skateboard and you just fall off. It's another thing if you're driving an F1 car and you just fall off. Yep. Right. So you have to have better and better advice. And as I get better and better, I'm like, oh, I can be a source of advice. And you do the same thing when you work with companies. And there's value in that maybe I didn't recognize when I was in my mid-20s, but I do now. Yeah.
No, I think that's something I reflect upon a lot because there's so much knowledge that you and I have that seems obvious to us, but is not obvious for the new entrepreneur. Yeah. So I think there is something about that just takes taste. And I think you have to be arrogant to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. So like I had to make all those same mistakes of making bad investments and losing money. And I think every great entrepreneur is too arrogant to listen to the other people because you think you know better. Right. So I think the people that select out of that is you have that arrogance to think you're smarter than everybody else. You make enough mistakes for the world beats you in the face. Mm-hmm. You're like, you're actually not that smart. But you don't give up. I think a lot of people are like, oh shit. Like
it's the resilience. Yeah.
And then you become like the mass. If you go out of that J curve for like, you lose your $10 million or you do your 10 bad investments.
Dude, I'm sorry, I'm better than you. I lost 100 million instead of 10 million. So beat that. No.
Hopefully the only advice I would give, like, hopefully you make your mistakes cheap and early while you're young.
Yeah. That is the best advice maybe that's ever been dropped on the show. Yeah. Is because it feels like you have a lot to lose when you're 20. You don't have anything to lose. Yeah. Right. What are they going to do? Take your credit report? It'll be fine in 7 years. Like you'll be okay. Right? Like it's the time to swing for the fences for sure. Yeah. And if you can just get a little bit of humility, there's a line of guys like you and me who are just happy to give you advice if you'll just listen and take it. Yeah. Right. Versus wasting time. Yeah. So it's one of the reasons I do the Business of Biohacking conference now. Yeah. And guys, it's businessofbiohacking.com. And this year we'll teach about 200 biohacking entrepreneurs. Here's how I built a $100 million business so that they've got the tools and skills. And the whole point is do not suffer as much as I have. I think that's my motivation for it. Yeah. Because I mean, you've probably taken some hits along the way building up Ketone-IQ, right? Yeah. What's the most difficult, emotionally stressful thing you've gone through as an entrepreneur?
I think in the Ketone-IQ journey, probably the most stressful moment was probably circa 2021 when we just won a $6 million contract with Special Operations Command. But the entire world and the end point there was testing ketone technologies for operator performance. So a lot of this stuff has actually started being published. So we can talk a little bit more about it. But back in that era of the global war on terror, GWAT, operators would fight at Afghanistan mountain fighting ranges. So like 14,000 feet altitude and up.
You need ketones at altitude. It's so important.
Yes. So that's hypoxic. And when you have lower oxygen, your reaction time increases, meaning that when you respond to a threat and you trigger pull, you lose about 30% of your reaction time, or it increases 30%. And there's just a number of, 6 to 8 test arms. And that was one of the coolest things in my career. Got to go to the CAG compound, literally going to Fort Bragg, Fort Benning to meet Ranger Regiment, and just see what our actual war fighters were doing.
Yeah.
So I was born and raised in Los Angeles in Palos Verdes, which is a very nice neighborhood. I went to college at Stanford.
You weren't in Compton. You didn't have to. You weren't in East Palo Alto.
But I also didn't. Yeah, I wasn't in those areas. But I also just never met people who served our country.
Yeah,
and it was and I feel like even at that time, I think it's gotten a lot better now. Silicon Valley was almost anti-military, all this defense tech stuff like Anduril is now popular now, but
Palmer Lucky's all over it.
But Palmer Lucky's a hero now, right? But Palmer Lucky was a weirdo where hey, you do defense tech, we're going to ban you. It's a vice category.
You're totally right. To be really clear, Palmer Lucky still is a weirdo, but that's a great compliment.
Yeah.
So I've had a chance to hang out with him a little bit.
Yeah.
If you guys are who the hell's Palmer Lucky? What was the company you started? The big
started Oculus.
Oculus, thank you. I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Oculus, the VR goggles that Meta bought. But now he's just building the coolest, I'm just going to have to say war stuff, but he thinks about it like a science fiction author.
Yeah.
And he's like, why would you give $12 billion to the government to lose it when I could just spend $1 billion and make this?
Yeah.
And he's either an evil genius with a volcano island set up, or he's going to empower the US to actually respond to some of this crazy stuff happening.
Yeah. No,
I don't know.
I'm a happy investor, and I think they're just ripping in terms of just any of that sci-fi autonomous warfighting capabilities. They're just bleeding edge on it. It's inevitable. We already see it in Ukraine, Russia, right? So that is where it's going. But anyways, going back to ketones, I think that was, one formational moment, just there are patriots that really not just quote unquote love the country, believe in the American dream. No, they're bleeding. Their brothers are dying.
They're willing to die for it.
Yeah. So this was right in the middle of COVID, our supply chain, we had supplier issues, and this is my first military contract. We had to sign a DoD contract, and this was my first time dealing with a large government institutional thing, a lot of paperwork, a lot of stuff that I signed off on, and we were having some supply chain and all of those issues. I won't bore with all that details, but I think that was a moment where it was can we even fulfill a government contract? If I fail this, do I go to jail if I if this thing doesn't work?
Wow.
Because we didn't know if we could fulfill on some of the supply chain and the production of some of the technologies we're working on. So that was I think a crucible moment around, one, if you literally aren't getting shot at our soldiers are, no one's actually trying to kill me. These are just tractable problems you can improve every single day and problem solve every single day. You just decompose, just do one good thing that moves the needle a day. You do that enough days in a row, you fix it.
It's kind of funny because when there's a threat to your company and you're an entrepreneur, it feels like it's a threat to you.
Yeah.
In Heavily Meditated, my new book, I go through threat processing as a system in the body and why it feels that way. But you're going to be reactive, and then you sit down with a true warrior. And I did a Joe Dispenza retreat with a former SEAL friend. And these guys are just at a different level where they're not going to get rattled by a business situation because they know what real threats look like.
100%.
But we feel like a business threat is real. How did you get over that?
I think a very similar, intellectualization of the problem, which is that I realized that the flight or flight response is related to physical threat.
Yes.
But business problems are intellectual threats, right? Like I remember I got, as you go in business, people sue you for random stuff. So
Dude,
you
all
get
the
served
time.
the first time, you're like, oh, holy, like a federal court lawsuit, I'm getting served. Like maybe you got a subpoena, you got to prep with lawyers. You're like, holy, like someone's trying to kill me. And like as an entrepreneur, like you have so much of ego into the business. We're like, oh my God, someone's trying to kill me.
They're trying to kill me and my baby.
Yeah. But then you realize that these are long, brutal processes. Like a lawsuit's going to take you 3 years to settle.
Oh, yeah.
So then you realize that adrenaline dump of like, let's go fight doesn't serve you well because our evolutionary processes were, okay, this is a tiger attacking you, get cranked up on adrenaline and like punch.
It's funny.
Intellectual battle is, you want to be cool, calm, collected, almost robotic.
And that is a secret there. It's funny because the predator types who file these just baseless lawsuits just to get paid to go away.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in business deals with that. They're counting on you to lose your mind and to cause you emotional stress. And when you're like Neo in the Matrix, like whatever, like I got a team. They're like, it's not working. And then they go sue someone else usually.
Exactly.
So yeah, just the non-reactivity piece. It's important, but one of the primary drivers of ability to stay grounded and to not be triggered is physiological function of your mitochondria. And I found studies about this. So if your ketone levels are high enough, or you have good metabolic flexibility and all the right minerals, all the stuff that makes hardware work, you're unflappable.
Yeah.
And if instead you have some donuts for breakfast, you got the extra 100 pounds I used to carry around, and then the same quote threat happens, and then you lose your mind, then you yell at your kids and you act like a total flaming jerk, and then you lose the lawsuit because you couldn't even behave yourself. Right. And I haven't gotten that far. I'd always, in fact, I've won all the times when people who didn't have any reason to sue me sued me. But it's like, what is going on is way more physiological before it's emotional, but it feels more emotional. And I feel like when entrepreneurs learn that, it changes their whole life.
Yeah.
But it changed their life at home too.
Yeah.
As you became a better entrepreneur, as you became more into ketosis, more metabolically fit, did it change your life at home?
I would say yes, in the sense that you realize that we're a biological system, like you could program a computer system. Like another way I articulate biohacking is that you're just engineering your biological system for an endpoint that you want to drive more towards.
There you go. It's
right.
Like resilience and long life and horizontal scalability.
Yeah. So like all of these things, I got into biohacking just from a longevity perspective. I wasn't fasting because I was overweight, I feel like a lot of people go towards biohacking from a sickness perspective, but I just was always interested in the enhancement side. So to me, it was like, okay, if I want to induce that type of performance, how do I just structure my life around that? And once you have some systems, then it's like autopilot. So I think a lot of how I orient towards how I spend my time is just building really good defaults.
So what are some of the defaults you built that work for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think ketosis, nutrition, installing exercise blocks, right? And just like also doing variability. Cause like, I think one thing that, for exercise, I'm not training to be an athlete. Like I'm not going to win any gold medal, but I just want to train variability where if any friend that's like a world-class athlete takes me into their domain, I can like hang. That's like literally my goal, right? Like if I'm taking a bike ride with Lance Armstrong, like I want to just be able to keep up. Or if I'm like in the boxing workout with Jake Paul, like I want to be able to keep up. That's my goal.
That's a big investment. I want to be able to hire someone to keep up for me.
Oh, come on, Dave. I know it's a strange area, right? But I think that kind of confidence in terms of being adaptive and being kind of quote unquote hard to kill in any situation seems like a very good default physical baseline.
Physical, emotional, and spiritual resilience combined with long life is the goal. And so there's a consciousness angle to this.
Yeah.
And I look back in history, and there's a reason why in Ayurveda and in Hindu scripture, let's do some fasting. You go back to traditional Chinese medicine. Let's do some fasting. And you look all around the world, and all the people who are studying consciousness and altered states work incorporated fasting for ketosis because they realized they could do more. And then when I started testing people's brains about 11 years ago at 40 years of Zen, And we're looking at, okay, what are the amplitude, what's the height of the brain waves that you can make? And what endurance do you have for altered states work? We found that if we could raise people's ketones, that they could do 2.5 times more high level intense meditation before they hit the wall.
Yep.
So if you go up to 40 years of Zen and you spend 5 days with my team with electrodes on your head, we're going to be giving you Ketone-IQ, because you literally get a better score and you can do more deep forgiveness and like loving kindness and other kinds of work. And it's just physiological biohacking.
Yeah.
Right. And,
I think there's something to that. I mean, I think you're speaking of like the Eastern traditions, but Moses and the Jewish tribes were like fasting through the desert.
Yeah.
The Greek academy, people were fasting before they entered the academy to study with like Socrates. So I think there's like I think it's like literally every tradition has some sort of fasting. I think to your point, it's like, okay, what is the endpoint that fasting is targeting? I think a major part of it, if not most of it, is ketosis.
Yes.
Because there's something that changes the effectiveness of your brain. So I think there's something to that. And I've just heard so many subjective case studies. I want to just put some clinical research dollars behind. But when people do, plant medicine, ayahuasca, they were saying that like, cause, they have like a special diet that's very clean. They're almost like fasting before they have their plant medicine journey. Right. So I think a lot of these things are related. And I've heard that like when someone, like I have an anecdote where these, squirrel suit jumper guys, that's, and this is like the highest death rate sport. Like I think half of them die.
It looks so fun. And I was like, what do I have to do to try this? And I went deep on it. I'm like, I really don't want to do a squirrel suit anymore.
Yeah. Like half the people literally die. And so one of these guys was telling me that, I don't know, they're just like some crazy adrenaline seekers, but I think he was just telling me that when he blends ketones plus ayahuasca, it's like a very like unique mental experience. So I think there's something to that to further explore. But I think it goes back to like some of the work you've done. Meditative state with ketosis, I think is an interesting combination.
All of the worthwhile altered spiritual states, and there's a flow state, there's like samadhi, there's these deep reprogramming states available. And that's the whole focus of my book that's just coming out. All of them require extra energy in the brain.
Yep.
And ketones have more electrons than sugar does. So it just makes sense. And my anecdote for that, I used to have an art car at Burning Man called the Fatmobile.
Okay.
And it was a giant stick of grass-fed butter. We took a Toyota Prius and cut off the tops like a convertible. And it was a huge thing. It could hold like 20 people. And it had a coffee cup from Disneyland that would spin around on top. And we would give out 5,000 cups of coffee, unbranded, blended with butter and MCT oil. And we do it at night. And when people are on medicines and they would get this little dose of MCTs that raise ketones, maybe 0.3, 0.5 if they're lucky, and it drops them back in and it amplifies the experience in a really beautiful way, because the brain is working and struggling to make these new networks and to make sense of reality when the default mode network is shut down. And all of a sudden this burst of electrons that could not come from anything else other than ketones, when it hits them, they're like, and then they go into their state. And it's kind of a beautiful thing to be able to do.
That's super cool. Are you still doing that? That's super interesting. I mean, we should bring that back.
I did that for about 3 years. And then the Burning Man DMV, they said, your car is too commercial. And I'm like, there's zero branding on this. I've never uttered the word bulletproof. I respect Burning Man values and all. And I'm like, and we have like another camp I appreciate very much named after a certain soap company. So like, I'm not meaning to violate any Burning Man rules here, but they basically said no. And I'm like, I have a $50,000 art car built specifically for Burning Man. I don't know what to do with it.
It feels like a great service to the playa. I went once. I want to figure out the next time I go back. It's a cool experience out there.
I'll be there again this year. And maybe my most memorable ketone experience on the playa, I had just parked the art car, had a bunch of friends on it, and we were going to go dance at some random place on the playa. And this really drunk guy comes up and he goes, is this that bullshit paleo coffee? And tequila is not the drug for the playa. It's not an alcohol kind of thing. It's too hot and dry. And I'm just sort of laughing. I'm like, oh yeah, can you believe that guy who makes that stuff? He goes, yeah. He goes, I heard he was on Joe Rogan. And I'm like, yeah, I heard Joe Rogan loved it. And at the time, Joe had been trying to cancel me. And so anyway, his girlfriend goes, well, why don't you try it? And he goes, ah. So he drinks some and stumbles off. Whatever. So 15 minutes later, we decided to go somewhere. So I hop in the car and start driving at 5 miles an hour. And then this guy on a bike's chasing me going, wait, stop, wait. And it's like it's the same guy, but he's so different. He goes, that stuff worked. He's like, and he's suddenly loose. He goes, my brain feels so much better. Can I just have another cup? Like, I want to go back and dance. And to go from like angry, drunk, unfocused, slurring your speech with some ketones to, I got my faculties back. So we were all laughing because he had no idea it was me. But it was such a neat thing to watch in 15 minutes. Someone who's like at the edge of their limits extend their limits out just using ketones. Like that was, I guess caffeine is in there too, but that's not, you can't drink a Monster Energy and get this effect. 100%. So I look at MCTs as like level 1 and the ketone diols, and there's like level 5, right? And at the time when I started talking about MCTs, that was all you could do. Yep. Right. And so we just have better and bigger ways to do it. And I don't object to a few MCTs here and there. I still use them on occasion, but it's not the big gun anymore the way it was. Yeah.
And I think part of it was also just the growth of synthetic biology. So like the process in which you make these ketone diols requires genetically engineered E. coli to ferment sugar.
Yeah.
So it used to cost super expensive because you needed to do a petroleum chemical engineering process to break down crude oil into the precursors for ketones. Mm-hmm. So like the taste was weird. Yeah. It was super expensive. But if you could have some like basically genetically engineered E. coli through a fermentation process, create the precursor, one, it's way cheaper. And it's just like, it's a much cleaner product.
Yeah.
So I think
that's what you're doing now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was like kind of the technical breakthrough from the supply chain perspective.
And you had to invest a lot to do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we had to just like jack up a new supply chain, essentially.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, our VP of product, has a master's in chemical engineering from MIT, undergrad from Stanford. So she's great. She helped build out Method Soap's actually like factory earlier in her career. So I think in terms of just like bringing the right supply chain and then also the demand, right? Because I think it's one of those things where it's like, these are metric ton orders. Like you're not producing, a liter for your lab bench, like to get to scale metric tons.
I did produce some ketone esters back in like 2013. It was $40,000 a kilo at my cost to produce them. And I'm like, this is insane. Yeah. Right. And so you've changed the whole industry there, and Ketone-IQ as it is today just couldn't have existed 5 or 10 years ago.
It couldn't. I mean, I think that's literally why it didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that because I appreciate having it every time I fly. By the way, if you stick around to the end, there's a really big discount code for you on Ketone-IQ. Is there one area of like a biohacking performance stack that's just still waiting for its iPhone moment, like where we finally solve a big problem?
I mean, like to me, it's like, I've almost like reverted back to just getting like all the basics really, really dialed in. Mm-hmm. Like I think so many of us focus on the next shiny object without getting the basics down. So to me, it's like going back to like defaults or good baseline. Like if I can just have a really, really good baseline of consistent sleep, exercise, nutrition, ketosis, that's like a good level 1 base. And then I'll like experiment with everything else. Right. And I think we've just seen like the CGM craze where like we're all having continuous glucose monitors. And I feel like there's going to be the next device or this thing that I feel like constant blood testing is now like the in vogue thing. But it's like, of course, having more data is more interesting. But like, like if you got lit and slept for 4 hours, your sleep score is going to be bad. Right. So I don't need like my little smartphone to tell me that, hey, your sleep was bad, like recover more. Yeah. So to me, it's like, what can I do that's the lowest effort to consistent baseline performance is like something that I look as a North Star.
I think there's some opportunities out there, and a lot of them are around correlative analysis. Okay. Which is, a pretty nerdy way of saying it. A while ago, quite a while ago on the show, I had a guy named Paul Zak, call him the Love Doctor. So he's into oxytocin. Yep. And he's saying, Dave, I've reduced the amount of blood that I draw by 85% Because if you let me monitor your heart rate with a detailed monitor, I can predict your oxytocin levels with, 95% accuracy of a blood test. You're like, that's amazing. So we haven't done all the work, and I'm working on some of the stuff with Upgrade Labs where we get incredible amounts, like 187 million data points per member per year, depending on how often they come in and what they do. But that's enough to start going, wow, what are the things we didn't know?
Yep.
And the first step on this is going to be, what are the things that affect our performance or longevity or our awareness that nobody knows?
Yep.
Right? And that's the first thing. And the second thing is, how do we reverse engineer that? So it's not just about what are things we're doing. How do we tell the body what we want it to do? How do we get a signal in more effectively? Yep. And that's going to change a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then how do we also figure out the kryptonite? Because lately microplastics have come up, and I'm concerned about microplastics, and I'm more concerned about toxic heavy metals and about glyphosate and about endocrine disruptors and birth control pills in the water. All these things are absolutely real.
Yep.
And there's a reason testosterone is low everywhere, right? Because we did that to ourselves. So I'm like, okay, let me look at eat a nutritious diet. Let me eat less toxins and the right foods.
Yep.
And that's actually a much bigger challenge because nobody knows what's in there. So I think toxin detection, and then learning how to send signals into the body that no one's dreamed of, or like the
no, I think that's actually, I think you describe a very nice iPhone moment, right? Like, what is the iPhone to me? It's, you put a supercomputer in everyone's pocket for the first time in a very easy to use way, right? It goes back to like a little bit of what I was saying, which is like, what is like a really good default that millions and billions of people can use without like going hardcore, nerding out super hard? Because we've all been there, like having 9 vials of blood drawn every week is, I mean, not the worst thing, but it's like, hey, it takes like money, effort, and time.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, you can actually correlate through heartbeat or heart rate variability a lot of these endpoints. So, okay, that's like moves the needle.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can tell someone, hey, wear this cool little band. And I have a correlate prediction of every single nutritional marker. Okay, that would change the needle. That would move.
And we're much closer than people think.
Yeah.
And with some of the data that we're getting at Upgrade Labs, we're looking at hemoglobin binding efficiency, brainwave amplitude, muscle output, VO2 max, electrical activity of cell membranes, and looking at all of it together with wearable data and going, oh my gosh, what is there in the human condition that we don't know about yet?
Yep.
And then do we modify it with ketones? I mean, who knows? Maybe you need a huge amount of glucose right now.
Yeah.
I don't know, but the data won't lie.
Yeah.
I think it's going to unlock not just some longevity things, but it's going to unlock some additional mental states or spiritual states of just like peacefulness and just not being programmable because like I have enough energy. You can't overcome my firewall right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's an area I want to unpack more because I feel like what's popular in 2025 biohacking is, I think there's like some things that are overhyped and then some things that are less underhyped, right? I think the work you've done with meditation is very interesting to me. And I feel like, and especially at this moment where we're all constantly being interrupted by notifications and like the next dopamine drip on when you do the doom scroll. So like, to me, it's like pretty obvious that you should try to sleep more, right? I think it's great that people are popularizing sleep. Great. Like that's pretty obvious. Okay. Don't eat like literally poison. Okay. It's pretty obvious. And then you can bend towards like things that are just more healthful.
Right.
But I think what people don't talk enough about is like the internal, like spiritual work, the mental work, the meditative work. And especially in an information environment where it's like every 3 seconds, you're like scrolling the next hot chick or like the next jack dude running around or like boobs in your face. And I think that the trends that I'm focused on now is like, literally education level and literacy levels for kids are like, they can't read.
It's
like
really
they can't
scary.
Do math.
My kids have this cool trick where they have 2 phones, and this one has the boobs, and this one has the.
No, but like but probably right. Like that is, I think, an interesting problem set that I think is just like of our era.
I used to describe to my kids, I'm like, every time you read a book that's worth it, you're installing an app in your head.
Yeah,
like it's a new lens on reality, and there's something about reading a book that does something different than watching a video.
Yep.
And if you watch brainwaves or just watch a kid's face, as soon as the video goes on, you go into this like dream theta state. You're like,
Yep.
And it's not a good place to learn from.
Correct.
Because it's too passive and you have to be able to think. And so you teach people to learn passively. It
doesn't work.
It's like the Stepford wife thing. If you've ever seen that movie.
Yeah.
I do know, though, and this is really interesting, studies of the brain looking at listening versus reading, they're actually pretty similar. So 20 minutes a day of either listening to or reading a fiction book has an entirely different effect on the brain than absorbing information.
Yeah.
So it's a really good practice to do that. And people say, well, you have to read it. You actually don't. You can hear it, and at least your imagination is working. You're forcing the brain to draw a picture for itself instead of having some external force draw the picture for you.
Yeah.
So there's a case for that for kids. And teaching them to be bored, it's the best thing ever. Like, take away their phones. Like, no, this is your 2 hours of, well, either boredom or find something to do that's not a device.
Yep.
Right. But I'm stressed. Well, great. You should be stressed by being bored, which makes you do stuff. Right. And if you don't do stuff and you're just stressed, I'm okay with that too. And maybe I built a farm and raised my kids on a regenerative farm where they had to feed the pigs and sheep and all that, because I think it is incredibly expensive and it probably took years off my life to get on an airplane all the time because I did that. But I think it was the best thing I could have done for them. So comfortableness with boredom is important. And then willingness to install important but hard to install apps in your brain. And that's why throughout all of at least the last 100 years, there's a set of books that everyone had to read.
The classics.
Like, George Orwell would be one of them. And now that's probably banned. They probably burned 1984 these days. Right. But everyone had to read that so we had a frame of reference. And I think that's fundamental to society.
Yeah.
And we're starting to lose that, and it becomes a meme-based society, but not everyone sees the same memes.
Yeah.
And get this, only 6% of the music that people listen to today is new music. And if you were to go back before we invented Napster and streaming audio and all that.
It's whatever the radio played.
Yeah. And so we all had like, oh, those are the songs of the 80s. And there are no songs of the 2025s. There's like 20 of them and some Taylor Swift or something, but the vast majority of what would have been there are gone because this group of kids is listening to Pink Floyd and those guys listening to 70s Bee Gees and like it's not the same.
Yeah.
So I don't know what we're going to do about that. Like, is the world going to fall apart or are we going to find a way to
I think it's an insightful way to put it, which is I think one of the main themes across technology, I know you're a technologist as well, is that it's a decentralization is happening across every single sector, right? Cryptocurrency, decentralization of banking. Biohacking is a decentralization, I would say, of healthcare. Very consciously, like, right? I'm disrupting the crap out of you hospitals. Sorry, guys. Yeah, no, I think that seems like a one-way path to empower the individual over some like canonical system that's right. It's driven for like a capitalist incentive that is good for the overall system, not for the individual. And I think there's something interesting about like the information decentralization. So I think to your point, there was like this canonical classics that everyone had the same metaphors and the same language and the same like core, what is good for civilization concepts. Yeah. I think it's probably good that we have even more increased diversity of thought. Agreed. But then at a certain point, like what is a country? What is a culture? You have like language and patterns that we all agree with. Mm-hmm. Now I think that's like an interesting world where I think this is manifest in politics. We don't need to get into it, but it's like people look at the same facts and they're like, this is the worst thing ever. Or this is the best thing ever. And I don't think that's like durable for a good functioning neighborhood or society when it's the same objective set of facts, but the interpretation, given everyone's templates of how they view that set of facts, is very different. And I think one thing that really resonated with what you said is that people can't be bored anymore. I like meditate on that a lot, which is that if you don't have boredom, you don't think. Mm-hmm. I think we're just bombing our brains just of passive stimulus. So I think we're all kind of zombified, controlled by algorithms right now. And I think to your point, like you have to actively fight against it. And I think more and more awareness is done around just actively guarding yourself against glyphosates, all these toxins in our environment. And I think probably more important or equally important is just like information defense. Like you got to be more rigorous around just, hey, let yourself be bored so you can actually think. So I think that's one of the best things I like is just like, I just want to think. I don't know if people think enough anymore. They don't process.
It's a problem. I tend to get overscheduled during the day where I don't have thinking time. It's meeting because I have a good EA team. But then I have limits. Like you will not schedule anything in the morning because that's when I'm going to be thinking and I'm going to be, taking care of my hardware. Otherwise, I would go crazy with the volume of companies that I have now. Yeah. One of the theories of consciousness that works best is that every life form evolves a user interface on reality that's best fit for purpose.
Yep.
Right. And so when you have two people look at the same fact and they have entirely different conclusions, one is it could be just their user interface doesn't agree, but much more likely their user interface has malware.
Yeah.
Right? You've actually been programmed without your knowledge. That's what being programmed is.
Yeah.
Right. And the more energy you have in your brain and the more you've learned the skills of self-regulation, which is basically removing malware from your system and preventing it from coming in. And malware can come from advertisers. It can come from mean friends. And it can come from deliberate moves from propaganda masters, whether they're in business or government, I don't care. Same source. All of those things, if you have the electrical resilience in the system and you have good self-regulation, your user interface on reality is cleaner, right? And you will not be dysregulated and you will not be programmed. Yeah. And so part of the ethos of biohacking is building people who are unprogrammable, right? It's like we have all of our malware vulnerabilities patched, and it's like, no, my body and mind will do what I choose.
Yep.
And no force on earth can take that away. Yeah. And the Buddhists would call that, that's like equanimity. That's on the path to enlightenment. And what I found in biohacking is most people join the journey because, so they have a health problem or they're trying to lose the weight, or they have brain fog, right? But once you get on that, pretty soon you're going to say, I want to do the longevity thing because I like my life. I got my energy back. I want to live forever and I want to be happy. So biohacking always leads to consciousness and longevity.
Yeah.
And those have been pillars forever. I just never put consciousness towards the front because it was way too out there 15 years ago when I was starting the biohacking movement. I put meditation on my LinkedIn profile and people thought I was nuts. Right?
Yeah. No, I think it's well put in terms of just, what is the underlying interface for reality? Like, are we in a giant simulation? Like, what is the interface? And I think society now selects for different things than reproduction.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just like, okay, like one, like good people need to have more kids. And then two, there's some biological / cultural limit of how many kids you can have, right? Unless you like just run straight up like a harem plus.
Are you talking about a certain entrepreneur?
Yeah. Elon's got a good system going. If you want to just like build the world towards your image, right? Like that's literally like
Genghis Khan did that.
Yeah. Like,
what is it? Like 15% of
like
Asia?
Like 6 of Asians have some, that I think was like the primal way to spread clones of yourself, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably like a reasonable thing to think about from a biological information transfer perspective. But I think also ideas, right? Like, obviously you have some genetic propensity to like things that carry your genetic similarity to you. But I think that's, I could see the argument that if there's cognitive similarities, like we think alike, therefore I want to propagate our shared ideals to the world. I think is another way to valuable think about it. So I think it's both. You need to have like the physical hardware, and you want your memes, right? Not like the cartoon memes, but like the idea primitives also spread. Mm-hmm. And I think this is why podcasts are super powerful, because as postmodernism has, I think, made religion less relevant for people, I really think that like this is like the modern day weekly pastor talk. Like, hey, here are some ideas you should think about. And I think that's why, again, you don't elevate people too high or too low, right? I think we're just having a cool conversation.
Yeah.
But it's just that, like, I think a lot of people don't have the opportunity to just like think about these ideas an hour, 2 hours a day and just like pause. Hey, let's like think about like the operating system of your brain, your own internal programming. Mm-hmm. I think if you're not intentionally programming your interface, then someone else is.
Mm-hmm. It's
right. So I think it's
100%
like,
true.
So you should be, so I wouldn't say like programming is bad. I think programming means that you have good automatic functionality, right? Like you have really good defaults.
You-
It's
you
about
should-
choosing what those programming is.
You should choose what you're getting from the App Store, right?
Yes.
And you should be allowed to accept automatic updates or not.
Yeah.
And if there's something that's leaking data back to some company, you should be aware of it.
Yes.
Right? And if you have that in your consciousness, you're just way more peaceful,
Yeah.
right? Because every little program that you're running that you don't know you're running sucks electricity from the system.
Yeah.
And just, it has to, like, that's how it works, right?
So I think like that's like something that like going back to like what I'm like most focused on. I think that that's like area that I think is under discussed, under thought about. And I think going back to just also like happiness, it's just like unclear to me. And I'm sure you have very successful friends who just aren't that happy.
Tons of them.
And it's just like, it's like weird because like you won capitalism, but you don't seem very happy. But if you're so smart, why don't you make yourself happier?
In fact, I would argue that there's an inverse correlation. The people I know with the most money, there's a higher percentage of unhappy people because they're suddenly surrounded. They don't know who likes them for their money versus who they are. There's people constantly trying to steal from them. So it's like, who do I trust and who's a real friend?
Yeah.
And their social circle shrinks and then they're worried about losing it.
Yeah.
And I've seen this over and over with some of the people who come through the neuroscience stuff I work on. And there's a lot of work you have to do to be able to hold wealth or power without turning into a psycho.
Yeah.
Or fame.
Yeah.
And I think fame might be the most toxic of all.
Yeah. Which I think that's where it's like, because I'm sure people that haven't made it at that level are like, fuck these dudes. Like they're like, I want that. But it is like true, I think, both ways where it's like, yes, having the optionality for abundance is probably better. Dude, but it's also like, it's also a new set of challenges and like you could F yourself up.
Yeah. Well, it's even before you get into like the big money thing, the number of young people say, I want to be an influencer. I'm like, do you know what kind of poison you're drinking?
Yeah.
I even did a whole show on the effects of fame with a guy who'd studied all kinds of Hollywood people. And it is worse than wealth for happiness. And by the way, having enough money to not have to worry about your basic needs does increase happiness.
Yes.
Above that, studies repeatedly show more money is nice, but it doesn't make you happier.
Yeah.
And there is a downside.
Yeah.
But fame is worse than money. And I just say for anyone who's going down that path, have a brain that works. And then you can maybe work on the more esoteric, emotional, spiritual problems of that. But if you're trying to navigate newfound wealth or newfound fame or even just a promotion at work, try to navigate that with a broken brain. And with 50% of the mitochondrial energy you should have, it's insurmountable. Yeah. Right. And that's why biohacking starts inside the cells. It starts at the physical hardware and you get that mostly right. And then you start doing, under my emotions. Oh, what's this whole altered states work? And it's a designed in order. And I actually did a long conversation one night with one of the AI models. Like biohacking is now, it's probably been 10 billion times mentioned. It's been in Vogue and Wired and like all over the place in many languages. So it's a part of society, at least for this like 50-year cycle.
Yeah.
Right. 100 years from now, will people know about biohacking? I have no idea. I'll be around to like see. That's my plan.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And frankly, it's not about me. Like, it's like, this is a thing. But like, if I wanted to make it stick around, what's the best strategy? Like, how do you make something permanent in society? Right. And you can do it through a cultural lens or through a institution lens, which is pretty much start a religion.
Yep.
So is it ethical to start a religion to get people to do what you want them to do?
That's a good question. I've thought about religion starting from a business perspective. I think the tax treatment for a religion is very interesting in terms of amplifying the capital you have.
Are you ordained?
No.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but I have not actioned this. I guess, like, what do I think about? I guess, like, as I've thought about religion as like a project, I get increased like respect for the traditional religions.
Me too.
Right? It's just like there is a level of conceit to say Jesus is your competition or Buddha is your competition, and those traditions have been durable for literally millennia. So I think to think about religion, and to compete with Jesus or compete with Buddha or compete with Allah or Muhammad, right? Like I think one should come at from a very pure spiritual place. I don't think I am like fully self-actualized to even like start thinking about like what those contracts could be.
The big question to me is Jesus competing with you? And the answer is no. It doesn't matter if you're competing with any deity.
Yeah.
I promise you that they're not competing with you.
Yeah.
If you understand the nature of deities.
Yeah.
But if you're Buddhist or in some of the Hindu faiths, they may be competing with their gods. So when I went to this was a Buddhist monastery in Nepal, and I spent 10 days and I was just learning about this, and they're like, oh yeah, our gods have their gods and they're jealous of them. And I'm like, what? And their gods have their gods and they're jealous of them. And it goes up at least 10 levels.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is there like a big master monster, like end of the round god who's like at the top of the I'm jealous of you pyramid?
Yeah.
And like, we don't know yet. I'm like, this is so mind blowing. What do you think?
I guess like what I try to tease out of that is that I think there are just streams of, like, to me, I think there's a combination of religion and mythology, right? Like, I think those probably start from the same roots, that there are just like characters and stories that are anecdotes that are useful for societal cohesion, right? But I think there's like probably just like universal truths that are less symbolic or less mythological that I try to like really embody. So like, I don't know about like if each specific miracle like literally physically happen, or like I think there's like, you know, variations of Christianity where there's literally like angels and saints, and I mean that's like the equivalent of like
You need to go to Burning Man more.
mini gods, right? I think you just like, I like to just like try to distill down to the most axiomatic truths of these principles, right? And I think, for example, Jesus' story around just like sacrificing for others, I think is like and also just that if you believe you're part of our tribe, I think it's like a very good narrative, for example.
The using tribal operating system parameters in humans to build long-term scalable beneficial behaviors that increase human happiness is a really good use of that part of our settings. It's just culture with structure. And if you go back to the original like pre-Gnostic Christianity, it was practice forgiveness. And I can show you the brainwaves of people who practice forgiveness. They are fundamentally happier, higher performing. They can enter altered states of flow state easier, and they like their lives better. It reduces suffering. Oh, wait. That's also a Buddhist goal, to reduce all suffering. So maybe we could just build forgiveness into our society. And I don't care if it has to be an organized religion where we all have, you know, school buses with teepees on them. I just don't care.
Yeah.
I just want people to understand this is what works for humans. And the problem is that when you and I were 15, would we have done anything we were supposed to do? No, because that's a flaw in our operating system, right? And if we did learn from our elders, we'd probably all never evolve and the world would be dumb too. I don't know how to fix all that, but I do know less toxins, more electricity. And I've often looked at religion. People don't know this. I was one class away from a minor in religious studies.
Yep.
Not because I was that interested, other than to figure out why people were crazy enough to believe it, but because I was trying to pad my GPA. And how could you get anything but an A in a religious course? Just make up some shit, and I like it.
Yeah.
So I went really deep on this. Low carb was a religion, starting with the Atkins stuff in the 90s. And I was a proud member of the Atkins cult, where like if anything that's a carb is bad, anything that's not a carb, you can eat it. And I have been to conferences, especially the very, very early days of forming biohacking, like low carb conferences. And it's the fattest people you've ever seen, like fatter than I used to be. And I was, 100 plus pounds from where I am now. And I'm like, guys, I'm here. I've also been obese, but it doesn't look like it's working.
Yeah.
And
I've observed some of the things too, like they're super hardcore. It's like, it's not working for you, brother.
Yeah.
You're like,
right. But here's what they would say. They'd say, well, I lost 100 pounds. Like I know I'm 300 pounds now, but I used to be 400 pounds. And it totally worked. Yeah. So I know that the problem is I'm doing 12 grams of carbs a day. And if I could just get down to 8, right? And then it never works. Yeah. And they're not thinking it's because of the NutraSweet and the aspartame and the canola oil and the soy protein that's in there, right? Because it wasn't part of the religious view.
Yep.
And one of the difficulties I've had in the world of biohacking, I read a book on intermittent fasting. It's like, do it for a brief period of time. The whole reason I wrote this thing is I could have just said, read the Atkins diet, except it doesn't work. Yep. So you have to cycle in and out of ketosis, right? That works much better. And the type of protein and fat that you eat really matters, right? So we've got to bring these in. And pretty soon, full respect, Jack Dorsey has a bulletproof coffee set up in his office. They've invited me to Twitter to go talk about doing a bulletproof cafe at their headquarters in San Francisco before Elon bought it, moved it to Texas.
Yeah.
Go Elon. And all this stuff. But then Jack's like, I'm doing one meal a day, Monday through Thursday. I'm not eating on the weekends. And pretty soon, like, Jack, your cheeks are a little bit sunken in there, dude.
Yeah.
And so people are overdoing these things. And so there's got to be some way of installing a new idea into society with appropriate breaks on it. And I feel like data is that.
Yep.
So what are the pieces of data that you as a computer science guy would want to know for us to improve the human condition?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great frame and great question. Before talking about the data part, I want to just go back to the religious part. I think as part of the religion, I think one thing that makes me skeptical of new religions, that I think it requires a human messenger. And I think humans are just tough critics of each other. So I think it's very hard to be maybe just the way I think about it. Like, what is like the most modern at scale religion? It's probably Bitcoin. And I think there's something about an anonymous archetypal leader.
Satoshi.
Yeah, the great Satoshi, right? Like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, they're not humans. They're like mythical, perfect creatures. So I think it's like, if I were to try to like instantiate a religion, it would have to be superhuman in terms of the character. Like, I think when you're a human, you're like, hey, I'm Jesus. It's like, man, like, that's a very hard challenge to be like, hey, you are the person. But Satoshi, an unknown pseudonymous figure that like dropped like some basically biblical like clauses to like anchor some sort of thoughts, and people are interpreting it as like, as if they're the gospels. I think it's an interesting template to think about. So like, if I were to instantiate a religion, I would think about pseudonymy and making the characters like superhuman as like a thought starter.
They almost have to be. When people are doing the reset process, which is at the core of 40 years of Zen, and I'm teaching this in my new book. Guys, I just want you to run the process. It's better with tech, but you don't have to. So it's kind of like the most precious thing I've ever learned is in Heavily Meditated. But one of the things you do is you instantiate in your mind a deity of your choice. And it can be a light bulb that's infallible. It just can't be any person who's ever been alive, because humans are fundamentally flawed.
Yes.
Not that we're bad people or original sin or anything like that. It's just we have a limited ability to perceive reality because we're wearing meat suits. Like they can all, time doesn't even exist in math. We just see time because it's useful to not get eaten by things, right?
Yes.
So with all of that, you have to be able to have this mythical, non-existent thing. And you're totally right. So Bitcoin may not have happened without Satoshi being, we don't know who it is. It's like behind the curtains. I never thought of that. That's really brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's I think that's the frame, right? Because I think every single like movement, you get some traction and then people start hating on the people around it. And it's like, okay, how do you solve that problem? You become superhuman. And then going back to the data point, like what are endpoints that I think are most, I go back to, how do you not get caught up in data porn, right? Like, I think they're just like all these epigenetic clocks for longevity. Like, do they work? Do they not work? Like, no one actually really knows, right? And people just tweak with the different epigenetics and the parameters. Okay, like you can kind of tune these things, right? So I almost revert to, can you kill me? Or like, are you actually smart and like you're teaching me things? Like actual functional endpoints that like show like prowess in the environment that we're actually in or competing with, right? So when I think about like physical attributes, it's like, okay, I can talk about like my VO2 max score or like my, different weird like flexibility routine, but like, can you outrun me? Or can you like beat me up?
This is an interesting frame. Like the hard to kill idea, I like that. I have moved from that, which would have been a way I would identify, like, not only can you not kill me, like, I can kill you.
Yeah.
Right. And I can still turn that on if I need to have that vibe in a tough neighborhood or something. Yeah. But it's actually, am I worried about dying?
Yep.
And if I have zero shits given about dying, because I've resolved all my fear on that, it makes me really dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can't threaten me with that.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. Like, let's throw down. One of us will die. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And predators hate people like that. They go the other way.
Yeah, they're all right. I don't want to.
Right.
I don't want to scrap at this.
Yeah. And that kind of thinking, some people are like, well, Dave, liquid death has bad energy in it. And I actually agree with that. Kudos to the entrepreneurs who did it.
Yeah.
And like, but danger coffee, no, danger. Who knows what you might do? Like, you should be in full control of yourself, because that means you can be dangerous and you can choose to do scary things.
Yep.
And without that, you're just like locked in a cubicle.
Yep.
So to me, it's fundamentally important that you have enough energy to be free.
Yep.
And that's fundamentally dangerous. And if we have values in society layered on top of that, then we have like an amazing world. But if we create weakness because we're afraid, the world sucks.
Yeah.
And weakness starts with toxins, and it starts with food.
Yep.
And then it moves into metabolism. And that's why biohacking is cool. That's why the Ketone-IQ formula is cool, because, let's just reboot that. Let's just get it going.
Yeah.
Right. And then all of a sudden, I got this. Right. And then you can start becoming less fearful of things.
But like that said, I think there are like core biomarkers that I think have stood the test of time.
What
right?
are they?
Like, I think hemoglobin A1C, right? Yeah. Like low fasted insulin, right? Like, I think if you're trying to induce ketosis, like an elevated ketone level, right? 1.523, right? Like, are you actually in ketosis versus, you just think you're eating keto.
You're eating a lot of protein.
Yeah. Or you're not actually in ketosis, right?
Yeah.
I think like like sex hormones are just super interesting, right? Like, what is like a end product of health? Like, you're supposed to be abundant enough to reproduce. So like, what is your testosterone level? So I think it's like we can, so I think those are, to me, have stood the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all these like biomarkers like feed into the end testosterone endpoint. Like, if you could optimize this thing at the tail end, that's one of 100 components that feeds into the testosterone pathway. But like, okay, let's just look at the testosterone pathway. Like, you can tell me that you have the most bio-optimized this thing, but what is that going to do? But testosterone, okay, muscle protein, sexual health, reproductive capability. Okay, like, those are endpoints that actually matter in your environment.
Yes.
And then I think I think I was like a little bit flippant, thinking, okay, like, these are hard to kill. It's like, I think all of those like basic blocks end up being to like, if all those things are correct, you should be hard to kill.
Yeah, you're highly resilient. I might add thyroid into that.
Yes.
There's like thyroid controls energy, testosterone controls motivation.
Yep.
Right? If you get it through dopamine pathways, if you get those two things dialed in, and maybe the third one would be inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein and homocysteine.
Yep.
And those are like the core biohacking blood tests that I've looked at for years, along with what you said, HbA1c, which is like, is your metabolism messing with your sugar, right?
I think C-reactive protein, I think, is like under talked about. Like, that is like the core inflammation pathway. I think people don't really measure it. I don't even see really people talking about that much anymore, actually.
It's kind of sad, because I could take anybody with those 4 lab tests or 5 lab tests, and 80% of the time
you'd be like, you're like,
fix what's
fit.
going on until like, oh, look, you have a sugar problem, you have a metabolism problem, hormone problem, or CRP. That's an infection problem, and homocysteine, you have a problem with your methylation pathways. Like, those are easy to fix. Well, almost easy.
Or then I think you could probably throw in LDL, HDL triglycerides, right? I think there is some question around like, is high LDL in of itself bad, right? Like, I think you can get into that really kind of energy transport theory behind that. But I think
I don't worry
with those,
LDL.
right? I think then it's like, okay, you have a good enough picture. I think that's like 90% of it. I think everything else is almost like data porn.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is, unless you have a specific problem.
Yes.
Like, if you have a catecholamine issue, you might want to go deeper on genetic whatevers. But for most people, they don't know any of those numbers, and it's not expensive to do it.
Yeah.
So, what do you know about ketones and testosterone?
Is there a relationship there? I don't think that's actually been studied. That's actually a very, very good question.
I haven't seen a specific study. I just know that if your ketone levels are higher, your mitochondrial function is higher. Your mitochondria do make sex hormones. Yes. And they certainly do power the parts of the body that make more sex hormones. Yeah. Basically, I think the word is gonads.
Yeah. Gonadotrophin. Yeah. I mean, I think the way I would think about the mechanism would be, I know that ketones post-workout increases muscle protein synthesis. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of recovery, I think there's like as far as I know, and I know the literature quite well, there's been no study on ketones and testosterone and how they correlate.
All right, let's see if Dr. Cunnane at UC San Diego will do something like that. He's probably the right guy to do that.
Yeah.
You could create any new human performance product you want. What would it be?
Okay, so it's like magic wand. What would I like to see exist? I think like if there's a way to just switch off like social mimicry. I feel like most people don't know what they want. They just copy what other people around them want.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, is that something around like, I think that generally makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, right? It's like, okay, the herd is moving this way. They think that the herd thinks this is valuable. We should just all do it. But I think the power of having like a healthy civilization is just like brave people fighting and exploring new things on the frontier.
Mm.
And I think like, to me, we're in like this weird world where there is a simultaneous decentralization of culture, but also centralization of culture, right? Like the algorithms kind of control what is cool or not, right? Like you can kind of tell that like, I see, you know, your short form content. Some of them go super viral and some of them don't. And it's like not very obvious to me why. I think the content's all relatively good, right? You wouldn't put it out there if you didn't think they're all equally pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
But some would have 5 million views and some, I mean, I think, okay, is it like insult? Is it more like spicy hot take? Are you know, talking about something interesting? Sure. I mean, I think we're playing to the algorithm, but if you could lower, I think some of the mimicry, especially around like, I think like branded fashion products to me, like don't make any sense. Like this is all the same Italian leather luxury product.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's better quality Austin American made leather products here, but we want the Italian fancy logo on it and we'll pay literally 1,000 times more for it. Like that to me, makes sense because it is a social signal that you have money to burn.
Mm-hmm.
So it telegraphs wealth, but people are just like skipping actually being wealthy and just taking their life savings to buy a bag. And it's like, that's like a weird hack that the luxury brand makers have programmed us to value.
What kind of car do you drive?
I'm driving a BMW right now. I had a Tesla before.
Okay. So you're not doing the supercar. just checking.
No, I feel like I'll ding it. Like one of my mentors, this guy, David Sheraton, he was like a legendary Stanford computer science professor, and I did research underneath him. He started the distributed systems group at Stanford, was like the first angel investor in Google. Cool. So he's like a multi-billionaire. You can look him up, David Sheraton. And I remember in his lab meeting one day, I was like, yeah, he was just like, I don't want fancy stuff because it adds stress to my life. Like if I have a really nice car, I have to like worry about where to park it.
Yeah.
Like if I have a boat, I gotta like, I can't like, I just want to be scraped. I gotta think about it a lot. So I colored a lot of like, but be all fair. Like I like nice stuff, but I think about it in a way of like, what am I using it for? And most of it is just signaling to other people. Like, why do I want a Ferrari? It's like, I want other people to think I'm cool and successful. So I don't know if I'm like a more of an appreciation of cars. Like I think I appreciate watches more than cars, but I think you have to be, to me, I think about the intentionality of why you like this stuff.
Yep.
But I appreciate craftsmanship. I understand like the feats of engineering, the material, carbon fiber for this and that, like cool. Like my business partner, Jake Paul, has a couple Ferraris. He's really excited about them, but I don't know. I think he literally drives them like once a year. He doesn't even drive. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so just like, okay, cool. If you have it and you like it and you have money, sure. But I think as an endpoint.
You talked about not knowing what you really want. Not you specifically, but just as a society, we have this problem. And the best book I've ever read for women in personal development is called Unbound, A Woman's Guide to Power by Kasia Urbanek. And she's speaking at the Biohacking conference this year, very highly sought after. And she's a Taoist nun who paid for all of her studies as a professional dominatrix.
Yeah.
So she's like, I've studied power. And you think that's the oddest combination ever. But she explains how society programs people, particularly women, because that's her subject of study, how they're programmed to not know what they want.
Yep.
And it has to do with you're either too much or not enough. And she developed exercises that you can do like on paper or with a friend, for women specifically, to help you become aware of what you want that you don't know you want. And it's so transformative. I probably bought a couple hundred copies of her book for friends. And they go through like, oh my God, I had no idea I wanted that, because society like puts blinders on us. And I think men have an equivalent system that's probably driven by different inputs.
Yeah.
But this idea that how do we install that new product that we just talked about so that people just are become, oh, what are my real motivations? Like, why am I doing this? What do I want? And I think most people genuinely, when they clear out most of the garbage and working with people on that process for a decade using tech, it's usually, I want to have meaning, purpose, community, and intimacy.
Yeah.
Oh, and I want some good food. All right. And like, there you go. It's not that hard, but just have it flipped around for most of us, where I just want to like not be afraid and distracted. And you just like, you peter out before you get to the good stuff.
Or like Goldman Sachs markets you, hey, you need like to work at a prestigious Wall Street firm or something, right? Like you add all these prestige things that are just like bombing you.
Yeah.
Hey, you should aspire to this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's like you shortcut to the end point. I think that's like well said.
All right, let's get back into biohacking. What's a biohack that once impressed you until you looked at the science?
I think the GLP-1 stuff is probably most top of mind for me right now. These things obviously are like the magic weight loss drugs that is very popular with celebrities and everything. But I think the second, third order stuff around it is pretty interesting, around just suppressing a lot of, I would say, like spontaneous behavior, right? Like, what does that mean for like gambling, for example, right? Like people have reported side effects of like not wanting to smoke and smoking cessation, or like drinking. And it feels like it is like an interesting tertiary effect that we don't understand that well as a society. And then on the other side, right, you hear of all the side effects where like it crushes your actual digestive ability. Like people have like these weird, really weird edge cases around all of that stuff. So I think to me, this is like a very interesting like social experiment that we're running, because like there's millions of people on this stuff. People have like really great initial outcomes. But like the way it impacts the brain is not well understood at all.
Interesting.
So that's, I think, an area that I think is interesting. I think the sleep tracking stuff I am just super skeptical of in general.
That it doesn't work, or that it's not useful?
More on it's not that useful. Meaning that like, you know what your interventions should be. Don't look at blue lights before you go to bed.
You know that now though, but I've been tracking my sleep for 17 years.
Yeah.
There was nobody writing about that.
Yeah.
Until like I became aware of that.
Yeah. But I guess like, do you actually change your behavior now that you are like the 17th year plus 5th day?
Oh, I don't.
Do you actually change your intervention?
Surprisingly, in the last month, I've been developing a different sleep stack, and I have increased my heart rate variability by 50%, and actually a bunch of other variables in a positive way. And I am like, you go to sleepwithdave.com, like I've taught 100,000 people how to sleep through the night. Like I'm pretty good at sleep. Yeah. Like I missed, like, how do I tune my catecholamine levels for optimal sleep?
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I only track what I hack. So I'll go a year and be like, I don't really care. I feel fine. Like I'm just not going to pay attention. But if you look, you're like, oh, there's a 2-month trend, right? Like I got mycoplasma pneumonia in Las Vegas right before Christmas. And like, wow, there was like a 6-week dump in my readiness that I hadn't really felt. I was like, oh, I noticed that something's not quite right. But even after I healed it in a week, like to climb back up to my like baseline was longer than I would have thought. So I do find that there's many things that you can feel, and the awareness is useful, but obsessing every morning over it is great for the first 6 months.
Yeah. And maybe what I'm getting to is that I just want to make sure we don't offload the animal intuition of how we're performing. I think maybe that's like what I'm getting to, versus like sleep tracking versus like glucose monitoring. Cause I was like saying that like, yeah, like I think our brains, to your point, these are interfaces to understand reality. And I think that the primal versions of ourselves just had a really good understanding of your physical state. And we don't know our bodies that well. So I think it's like, okay, how do you, maybe to flip the question, what should we like focus more on? It's like, how do you actually train your brain to actually understand your physical state better?
Oh, Now we're getting into the fun stuff. You mean with real-time feedback, which is, I used to go to the quantified self meetings. Like I remember in 2011.
Yeah.
I saw the poster from that somewhere. And I gave this
That
talk.
was the original term for biohacking, I felt like.
Yeah.
It was like quantified self. I haven't heard that term in years.
Oh, yeah. It turns out the quantified self community, they just wanted the data, but they didn't want to do anything with it.
Yeah.
And I was kind of frustrated. I'm like, I'm doing real-time feedback to train my heart rate variability, to train my brain waves, and like to change the temperature on my finger. And I remember I met this couple. They're like, we have 8 years of her monthly temperature variation to predict ovulation. Isn't that cool? And I'm like, great. What do you do with it? And they're like, no, we just have the data. I'm like, oh yeah, these are stamp collectors.
Yeah.
Like
you make a bunch of babies with it. Like what? Yeah. What's the point?
It was like data fetishism, and I'm fine. I'm not kink shaming, right?
Yeah.
Like you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm like, how do I train my body to not need this? So what for me was just transformative. I did, 6 weeks of heart rate variability, real-time feedback training to consciously control it.
Yeah.
And then it's like inside your brain is a panel from a 747 with knobs and dials and switches everywhere. And you can't even see them.
Yeah.
And you don't know what they do. And then you do this kind of training and all of a sudden, oh, that gauge, I can see it now. And it just went into fight or flight mode. Oh, and if I twist this knob, it goes back down to parasympathetic. That's cool. Yep. And so my whole goal has been, I want to turn on every lever, every knob, every gauge so that I intuitively know the state of my body and I have full control over it. And I'm fine to use, an adaptogenic herb if I need to, but I'd rather just be like, these are not the droids you're looking for in your own head.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
Notice how I did Star Wars and Star Trek? That was intentional to offend everyone. If you're just listening, I just did the Spock thing with my hand while making a Star Wars reference to offend all of my friends. But this whole idea of building in awareness and control, I think it's fundamental to human freedom. It just doesn't work if you have enough power, which is why the ketone conversation, the work you're doing, is pretty fundamental. And the harder you work, the more at risk you are, the higher altitude you are, the more, you're a warrior, the more you're an entrepreneur, the more, heck, you're a mom who just stays up all night breastfeeding, the more you need metabolic efficiency and the more you're going to need ketones. Maybe not every day, but some of the time.
100%.
So thanks for coming up with some cool stuff. And I don't think a lot of people who've heard of your product know the degree of evolution that has happened.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect conversation because I don't think like without a dance partner that actually also knows the history that well, I think this is a fun conversation beyond just ketones. But I just think all the philosophy stuff, I think it's fun, good dialogue here.
It's a great time to be alive, right? I always ask entrepreneurs to come on the show to talk about all their cool stuff. You got to throw a bone for listeners.
Of course, got to support the OG Dave community. The special link is ketone.com/Dave, DAVE.
All right. And you're giving them, 30% off plus a big free gift on the second order?
Yes.
That is actually really serious discounts. Thank you. And guys, I'm not kidding. I pay for this stuff for people who go to 40 years of Zen, high-level CEOs spending 5 days reprogramming themselves. I have them drink this before their afternoon session so they can do the deep work. It actually works. It's ketone.com/Dave. And if you're a road warrior like both of us and you fly all the time, I'm going to just be a little bit judgy here. You're an idiot if you don't drink Ketone-IQ before you get on a long flight. It will protect your DNA according to the top experts in the world who I have interviewed. And this is something Jeff is telling me, although this is true. You can't make these claims. I can. So I'm just telling you this is a permanent part of my longevity and biohacking performance and longevity stack. Ketone.com/Dave. Save a bunch of money. All that kind of stuff.
See you next time on the Human Upgrade Podcast.